Imagine stepping into a world where marble corridors shimmer like water, where ceilings glitter with gemstones, and where every surface is covered in gold, so radiant it reflects sunlight like a second dawn. This was Nero's dream, a dream built from ashes, ambition, fear, and boundless extravagance. The story of Nero's golden house, the Domus Aurea, is one of the most astonishing chapters in ancient Roman history. The villa was so vast, it stretched across the heart of the city. Its halls filled not with the sounds of ordinary life, but with fountains, perfumes, rotating ceilings, and mechanical wonders that made visitors feel as if they had stepped into the palace of a god. Yet behind this breathtaking splendor lies one of the most controversial moments in history, the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. Did Nero truly set the city ablaze to make room for his paradise of gold? Or was he the victim of rumors twisted by time, politics, and fear? This script explores the birth, grandeur, and downfall of Nero's Golden Palace, guiding you gently through the world of ancient Rome with calm storytelling, rich detail, and a focus on historical nuance rather than sensationalism. Each section reveals a different aspect of the story: the man, the fire, the architecture, the innovations, the politics, and the legacy, all while keeping the narrative fresh, non-repetitive, and deeply engaging. Let us now walk into the shimmering dawn of Nero's imagination, where beauty and madness intertwined in ways history has never forgotten. Section 1. A City on the Brink. Rome before the fire. Before the fire that would reshape Rome's destiny, the city stood as a chaotic marvel, a place bursting with energy, ambition, and danger. The Rome of the mid-first century CE was a sprawling giant, a living organism made of wood, stone, narrow alleys, crowded markets, and millions of footsteps echoing from sunrise until long after dusk. It was the beating heart of the ancient world, but it was also fragile, volatile, and precariously balanced between prosperity and catastrophe. Walking through Rome in 63 CE, one might be struck first by the density of life. The streets were so narrow that carts could hardly squeeze through. Families lived stacked in wooden apartment blocks known as insulae, some rising 5 or 6 stories high. These unstable structures leaned toward each other like tired old men, their balconies nearly touching across the streets, offering shade, but also increasing the risk of fire spreading rapidly from building to building. Inside, oil lamps flickered near wooden beams, kitchens burned open flames, and thousands of residents cooked, slept, prayed, and lived in spaces that were cramped and flammable. Even the wealthier parts of Rome carried dangers. Large homes were packed tightly together, storage rooms filled with textiles and oils, and workshops lined street corners where sparks from blacksmiths mingled with the smell of burning charcoal. The city was a masterpiece, but it was also a tinderbox waiting for the smallest spark. Politically, Rome was no calmer. Nero had been emperor for nearly a decade, and his reign was increasingly controversial. At first celebrated for lowering taxes and promoting the arts, Nero later grew unpredictable, surrounded by advisors who feared his temper and encouraged his vanity. His fascination with poetry, acting, and music clashed with the expectations of Roman elites, who believed emperors should command armies, not audiences. Beneath the surface, discontent simmered. Senators whispered behind closed doors. Military commanders monitored Nero with suspicion. Citizens grumbled about new taxes, while others adored him for his theatrical performances and public games. Rome was a city divided in spirit, vibrant yet tense, prosperous yet unstable. But perhaps the most telling feature of Rome at this time was its relentless expansion. Temples rose in marble splendor, aqueducts carried water across vast distances, and new public baths welcomed thousands of visitors each day. The population had grown so large that even the most basic tasks, cleaning streets, disposing of waste, maintaining order, strained the city's resources. A fire brigade existed, but it was small and poorly equipped. Rome was magnificent, but deeply vulnerable. Against this backdrop, Nero's ambitions began to grow. He dreamed of reshaping the city into a place of symmetry, beauty, and harmony, a new Rome that reflected art more than practicality. He envisioned broad avenues, vast parks, and architectural masterpieces, but such dreams had little room to breathe in the cramped, chaotic reality of the city. So even before the flames erupted in 64 CE, the seeds of transformation were already present, both in the city's physical fragility and in Nero's restless imagination. The people of Rome lived tightly packed in a maze of wooden structures. The emperor grew increasingly detached from traditional responsibilities. The political atmosphere thinned like overstretched fabric, and the natural vulnerabilities of the city loomed quietly, waiting for their moment. When the fire finally came, it did not arrive in a Rome prepared to resist it. It arrived in a Rome ready to ignite. This is where the story begins, not with flame, but with a city already trembling under the weight of its own brilliance, excess, and instability. Section 2. The night the flames awoke, the great fire of Rome. The night of July 18th in the year 64 CE began like any other warm Roman summer evening. A faint breeze drifted through the narrow streets, carrying with it the mingled scents of cooking oil, bread, spices, and smoke from 1,000 small hearths. People lounged on balconies to escape the heat trapped inside their insulae. Children slept on rooftops for cooler air, and the city hummed with a familiar, rhythmic energy. To the millions who lived there, Rome felt eternal, vast, strong, and unshakable. But deep within the maze-like quarter known as the Circus Maximus, a spark was about to transform the city forever. Accounts differ slightly, but most ancient writers agree the fire began in shops beneath the wooden seating of the circus. These shops were filled with goods that ignited easily: oil, fabrics, straw, pottery ovens. One candle tipped over, or one stove overheated, and a tongue of flame began to lick the walls. At first, there was only a flicker, small and manageable, like the dozens of fires Rome survived every year. But on this particular night, the wind shifted suddenly. as if the air itself had turned conspirator. The breeze grew stronger, funneling through the curved walls of the circus and feeding that small flame until it swelled into something far more dangerous. Before long, the fire had grown so large that passers-by could feel its heat from the street. Locals ran for water, forming frantic chains from well to flame, but their efforts were swallowed by the intensity of the blaze. The fire leapt upward, climbing the wooden bleachers of the circus, racing across them like a living creature tasting freedom for the first time. In minutes, the entire structure was a roaring inferno. As the flames escaped the circus, they surged into the residential districts beyond, areas packed with wooden homes, narrow alleys, and tightly clustered workshops. The design of the city betrayed its people. Streets were too cramped for emergency carts to enter, staircases too steep for hasty evacuations. Wind swirled around corners and carried burning debris from rooftop to rooftop. Soon, entire blocks were engulfed. Panic spread even faster than the fire. People woke to choking smoke and the sound of neighbors pounding on doors. Families scrambled downstairs as burning walls collapsed behind them. Some grabbed belongings, a handful of coins, a cherished statue, a precious scroll, while others fled with nothing but the clothes on their bodies. Mothers held children tightly as crowds surged toward the Tiber River, hoping for safety by the water's edge. As the hours passed, the fire took on a terrifying intelligence. It seemed to choose new directions with purpose, shifting unpredictably as gusts of wind funneled through Rome's labyrinthine streets. Embers floated like glowing insects, landing silently on distant rooftops before bursting into new flames. Entire districts burned simultaneously, separated not by distance, but by luck. The fire brigade, small and poorly coordinated, struggled to respond. Their equipment was limited: buckets, hooks, ladders, tools designed for small domestic fires, not a city-consuming storm of flame. They attempted to create fire breaks by tearing down buildings, but the blaze moved faster than their axes. Even the soldiers who were eventually summoned found themselves overwhelmed, not by enemy forces, but by heat, smoke, and collapsing buildings. By dawn, Rome was unrecognizable. Thick pillars of ash rose into the sky, turning the morning sun a dim copper. Birds fled overhead, their silhouettes blurring behind smoke. Survivors wandered the streets in shock, their faces smeared with soot, their eyes red from tears and smoke. Fires still raged in multiple districts, and the smell of burning wood and charred grain saturated the air. The fire raged for 6 days. It advanced like a conquering army, burning through the city's overcrowded districts, sparing nothing. Temples fell, some ancient, some newly built. Libraries, shops, homes, warehouses, and entire marketplaces vanished in the flames. Livestock fled through the streets, adding to the chaos, while dogs barked maddeningly and horses screamed as stables collapsed. On the 7th day, the flames finally died down, only to reignite in a different part of the city. Rumors spread quickly, whispers that people had seen figures with torches, setting new fires intentionally. Some claimed these arsonists were looters. Others insisted they were agents acting under orders. And in the turbulence of fear and confusion, suspicion began to turn toward the emperor himself. Nero, according to some ancient sources, was away at his villa in Antium when the flames first rose. When word reached him, he rushed back to the city and allegedly organized relief efforts, opening his gardens to refugees, distributing food, and providing shelter. But despite these actions, rumors spread faster than the truth ever could. People muttered that Nero had wanted the fire, that he longed to rebuild Rome according to his own artistic vision. Others said he had watched the city burn while singing from his palace balcony, though this detail likely arose from political enemies rather than fact. Still, the city needed someone to blame, and Nero, already viewed with suspicion by many senators and elites, became an easy target. By the time the final flames had been extinguished, Rome lay in ruins. 10 of the city's 14 districts were damaged. 3 were completely destroyed. Streets were covered in ash, charred beams, melted bronze, and loose tiles. Survivors searched the rubble for anything salvageable: a pot, a coin, a piece of jewelry, even a scrap of unburned fabric. Others simply stared at the ruins, unable to process the scale of loss. And yet, out of this desolate landscape, something extraordinary would rise. Something beautiful, controversial, and unimaginable in scale. From the ashes of the Great Fire, Nero's most ambitious dream would begin to take form. The Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a palace so vast it defied comprehension. A project so audacious it changed Rome forever. A creation that still whispers through history. Section 3. The birth of a golden dream. Nero's vision takes shape. When the Great Fire finally released its hold on Rome, the city felt hollow, as if the flames had carved out not just its buildings, but its spirit. Smoke still drifted lazily through the air days later, clinging to broken walls and twisting above the ruins like ghosts reluctant to depart. People walked more quietly, their footsteps softened by layers of ash. Grief hung heavily over the capital of the empire, and yet even in this somber stillness, something else stirred. A shift in power, a stirring of ambition, and in the mind of the emperor, a vision unlike anything Rome had ever known. For Nero, the ruins of Rome were not merely a tragedy, they were an opportunity. Before the fire, Nero had long felt constrained by the physical limits of his palace on the Palatine Hill. The emperor, who considered himself an artist above all else, dreamed of creating something grander, more expressive, more reflective of his personality. Some historians say that even before the ashes cooled, Nero had already begun drafting plans for a new Rome, one that radiated beauty, symmetry, and divine splendor. Whether this is truth or rumor, one thing is certain. Within weeks, Nero's architects were at work. The man he trusted most for this project was Severus, a master planner with a love for innovation, and Celer, a visionary engineer capable of bending stone and space into shapes that defied traditional Roman design. Together, they helped Nero imagine a palace not simply large, but limitless, not merely luxurious, but transcendent. The land they chose was the very heart of the devastation, a vast area cleared by the flames. To many Romans, this was sacred ground, a graveyard of homes. To Nero, it was a blank canvas. At first, no one could imagine what Nero intended to build there. Rumors swirled, a palace the size of a town, gardens larger than estates, rooms plated entirely in gold, a lake fed by artificial rivers, groves imported from distant regions, banquet halls where the ceiling would rain perfume and rose petals. It sounded impossible. It sounded like a myth. But the groundwork began. Entire teams of laborers cleared rubble, leveling hills, and carving landscapes. Architects walked the terrain with scrolls and measuring rods, laying out impossible geometries. The emperor himself visited the site frequently, offering ideas, sketching shapes in the dirt with a stick, and speaking with sparkling eyes about his dream of creating a paradise on earth. What Nero sought was not a home, but a world in which he could walk for miles without leaving his own domain, a world where art, sculpture, nature, and architecture blended seamlessly, a world that reflected his sense of grandeur and his longing to be remembered not as a tyrant, but as a creator. It was during these early stages that the most ambitious feature took shape, an enormous artificial lake surrounded by rolling hills and forests. Once completed, these landscape features would make the palace feel like the countryside, even though it sat in the center of Rome. It was the birth of something unprecedented, a rural paradise in an urban heart. Workers dug channels that would bring water into the future lake, shaping its edges with stone and clay. Trees were transported from distant estates, olive, cypress, laurel, and pomegranate, and planted carefully along the slopes. Exotic plants arrived from far-off provinces, fragrant palms from Africa, blossoms from Syria, climbing vines from Greece, lotus flowers from Egypt. Birds imported from across the empire were released into the new groves, filling the construction site with unexpected bursts of color and song. Little by little, the landscape began to transform. But the true marvel, the palace itself, was where Nero's imagination soared highest. The Domus Aurea, the Golden House, was unlike any traditional Roman structure. Instead of sharp corners, it featured sweeping curves. Instead of heavy walls, it incorporated open spaces, colonnades, and passages where sunlight streamed freely. The materials themselves whispered of luxury: marble from Greece, alabaster from Egypt, red porphyry from distant deserts, and of course, gold. Gold everywhere. Not merely gilded accents, but entire walls plated with thin sheets that reflected lamplight as though the palace glowed from within. Even the ceilings shimmered, intricate mosaics embedded with mother-of-pearl, silver leaf, and gemstones. The banquet hall was planned as a wonder, its ceiling designed to rotate slowly, mimicking the night sky. Guests would dine as if beneath the cosmos, their plates illuminated by candlelight caught in the mirrored walls. Everywhere, water moved gently, trickling fountains, hidden channels beneath floors, pools reflecting shafts of light. Nero believed running water calmed the mind, and he wanted the palace to feel like a place where the world itself breathed softly. Inside the construction camp, the atmosphere was strangely peaceful. Workers, though exhausted, felt they were creating something legendary. Architects debated details late into the night, their conversations drifting across quiet streets. The scent of fresh-cut wood, wet plaster, and imported cedar filled the air. Sculptors carved marble figures by torchlight. Painters laid out pigments for frescoes. Deep blues, soft greens, ochres, cinnabar, and brilliant white. Rome was being reborn, not as the city of the people, but as the city of an emperor's dream. And yet, even as these magnificent plans unfolded, citizens watched with mixed emotions. Some admired Nero's ambition and believed a more beautiful Rome would rise from the ashes. Others viewed the project with dread, seeing it as a symbol of Nero's overreach, an empire bending beneath the weight of one man's ego. Still, the work continued. By the time the first sections took shape, it was clear that Nero's project was not just a palace. It was an entire imagined world. Forests, lakes, halls, stables, baths, pavilions, gardens, and corridors that stretched farther than anyone had ever dreamed possible. A sanctuary where nature and stone intertwined. A place where the emperor could escape the harshness of Rome, and perhaps escape the whispers that followed him everywhere. The Domus Aurea was becoming real, and its existence would change everything: politics, public opinion, and Nero's fate. Because a dream of such scale always casts a shadow, and in that shadow, enemies were beginning to gather. Section 4. Behind the gilded walls inside the Golden House. 1,000 words. The first visitors to step inside the nearly completed Domus Aurea found themselves overwhelmed before they had even crossed the threshold. It wasn't just the scale, though the palace stretched so far that one could walk for hours without reaching its outer limits, but the feeling that they were entering another realm entirely, a place where reality had been shaped by imagination rather than stone. The entrance itself set the tone. Great bronze doors towered above the guests, engraved with swirling scenes of myth and nature. Gods riding clouds, rivers twisting like serpents, animals leaping through forests. When the doors opened, they did so silently despite their immense weight, as though the palace breathed them apart. Cool air drifted outward, scented with myrrh, cedar resin, and the faint sweetness of exotic blossoms. The emperor had ordered a complex ventilation system, hidden beneath the marble floors, that circulated perfumed air throughout the palace. Some said it was a luxury. Others whispered it was Nero's attempt to erase the lingering smoke memories of the fire. Upon entering, visitors found themselves in a vast atrium, unlike any Rome had seen. Instead of a traditional roof, the ceiling soared high above, domed and painted with a canopy of stars. Gold tesserae reflected the lamplight, making it seem as if the stars shimmered with gentle movement. Sunlight streamed down through cleverly disguised openings, illuminating fountains that bubbled softly in the center of the hall. The walls were a cascade of colors: sapphire blues, emerald greens, pale rose hues, and deep purples, blending in frescoes that depicted landscapes, gods, animals, and distant horizons. This was the work of Fabulous, Nero's favorite painter, who believed a room should feel like the inside of a dream. Every surface shimmered, every detail felt alive. Moving deeper into the palace was like walking through a sequence of worlds. Corridors curved gently, guiding visitors toward the central spaces without abrupt angles or harsh lines. Nero believed that hallways should flow like rivers, encouraging thought, reflection, and calm. The marble underfoot changed depending on the section: milky white near the baths, warm orange near the feasting rooms, deep red in intimate chambers. One of the most breathtaking rooms was the octagonal hall, a marvel of engineering that still confounds architects centuries later. Its dome, pierced by a circular opening, allowed sunlight to pour down like a column of golden water. The walls were covered in mother-of-pearl and slices of translucent alabaster that caught the light and glowed softly, making the room appear lit from within. But the true surprise lay in its ceiling, a mechanism that allowed it to rotate, drifting slowly in time with music or the rhythm of dinner conversations. As the ceiling moved, lamps hidden in alcoves created shifting constellations, giving the impression that the heavens themselves turned in harmony with the emperor's wishes. When Nero hosted banquets here, the room would release gentle showers of rose petals or a fine mist of scented water, a feature that astonished and unnerved many guests. It was said that some senators laughed too loudly during these dinners, unsure whether they were enjoying the emperor's hospitality or performing for their lives. Beyond the octagonal hall lay gardens indoors, groves contained within glass-like surfaces, a luxury Rome had scarcely imagined. Transparent panels, crafted from polished selenite, allowed sunlight to flood rooms filled with rare plants: lilies from India, orchids from Ethiopia, orchids from unknown mountains. Small birds flitted freely among the branches. Nero loved the idea of beauty in motion. Walking through these rooms felt less like touring a palace and more like wandering a living forest carefully enclosed in stone. Then there were the baths, warm rooms shimmering with steam, their floors inlaid with mosaics of dolphins and sea nymphs. The marble walls were carved so precisely that water flowing down them created faint melodies. Engineers had designed channels that allowed water to cascade softly from ceiling recesses, like rain in a hidden grotto. It was said that Nero bathed here at night, alone except for music, drifting through unseen passages. In the reflections of the water, the gold-tiled ceilings glittered like stars caught beneath the surface. But the most breathtaking space of all was the great dining hall, known as the Coenatio Rotunda. It was circular, enormous, and elegant, its walls behaving like mirrors when lit by torches. The floor was polished so smoothly that footsteps seemed to glide rather than strike. The rotating ceiling above was painted with clouds and atmospheric swirls, giving diners the uncanny sensation that the sky moved with them, as if reality itself revolved around Nero's table. At feasts, musicians played gentle flute melodies, that echoed through hidden channels. Servants dressed in fine fabrics glided soundlessly between tables. Dishes from every province of the empire were served. Honeyed fruits, figs stuffed with herbs, roasted meats perfumed with cinnamon, wines that glowed deep red. The food, the fragrance, the music, the golden shimmer of the walls. It created a sense of harmony so surreal that some guests left the palace unsure whether they had witnessed a banquet or a vision. Yet there was something else inside the Golden House, something quieter, more intimate, hidden chambers lined with books and scrolls, private gardens where streams whispered over small rocks, rooms where Nero practiced his singing or composed poetry. Despite his reputation as a tyrant, he saw himself as an artist first, emperor second. The Golden House was proof of that, a sanctuary built not only to impress Rome, but to soothe the emperor's restless spirit. Still, whispers grew louder beyond the palace walls. Rome's people questioned the cost of such magnificence. Senators muttered behind closed doors. Soldiers joked about golden ceilings while keeping their voices low. The more spectacular the inside of the Domus Aurea became, the more resentment brewed outside. Nero didn't seem to notice at first. Or perhaps he noticed and chose not to look directly at the shadows forming around him. Because within the Golden House, everything was light, and outside it, everything was beginning to darken. Section 5. The Rising Tension. Whispers, accusations, and the turning tide. When the Golden House first opened its gleaming doors, Rome's people didn't quite know what to make of it. They had heard rumors, extravagant whispers of gold leaf walls, rotating ceilings, perfumed fountains. But rumors were one thing, and reality was another. As the details reached the ears of common citizens, the city began to divide along a subtle but widening fault line. For the poor, who had lost everything in the Great Fire, the palace was difficult to comprehend, an endless sanctuary of wealth, built where their homes once stood. Some felt awe, some felt bitterness, many felt both. It wasn't that Rome objected to beauty. Romans adored grandeur. But beauty on such a staggering scale created discomfort, as though the palace were a reminder of how fragile their lives truly were. Senators, too, were unsettled. The Golden House represented a shift in power, not political, but cultural. For centuries, Rome's elite had defined luxury. They commanded influence with villas, sculptures, and lavish dinner parties. But the Domus Aurea eclipsed everything. It was not merely splendid, it was unprecedented. It made their estates seem small, their art modest, their influence trivial. And Nero, in all his theatrical confidence, seemed unaware or unconcerned about the resentment forming like storm clouds behind polite smiles. The whispers began slowly, almost gently, like a breeze stirring leaves. Some wondered whether Nero planned the fire. Others claimed he had ordered workers to expand the palace even before the ashes cooled. Most of these rumors were born from grief, confusion, and fear. But fear has a way of shaping itself into belief. Far from the palace, in dimly lit taverns and crowded market squares, conversations carried a different tone. People asked why the emperor sang while the city burned, why rebuilding efforts moved slowly, why taxes rose, and why Nero spent so much time on artistic performances instead of governing. Meanwhile, inside the Golden House, Nero continued to chase vision after vision. He invited poets, musicians, and architects to share ideas. He rehearsed songs late into the night. His voice, though not extraordinary, carried a delicate softness when he sang alone, a sound few ever heard. His inner circle encouraged his artistic pursuits, some out of genuine appreciation, others out of survival. Yet despite all this beauty and indulgence, Nero sensed a shift, not openly, not in words. It appeared in fleeting expressions, a glance between senators at a feast, an overly formal tone in a letter, a pause too long before applause began. Something had changed. One evening, during a private banquet in the rotating dining hall, Nero watched his guests more carefully than usual. The ceiling above drifted in slow circles, the painted clouds moving like gentle waves. Musicians played light flute melodies. Rose petals floated down from the mechanism above, as delicate as butterflies. The emperor raised his cup and looked around. For the first time, he sensed distance, a coolness that no amount of gold or music could conceal. His guests still smiled, still praised the food, still commented on the palace's marvels, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Later, when the hall was empty and the musicians had retired, Nero walked through the quiet corridors alone. The marble floors reflected his steps like rippling water. Lamps flickered in recessed alcoves, casting warm light across the frescoed walls. As he passed the indoor gardens, small birds fluttered among the branches, their soft chirps echoing in the vast silence. But something about the palace felt different now. The vastness, once soothing, seemed hollow. The gold shimmered too brightly. The silence stretched too far. Far beyond these walls, the Senate had begun discussing ways to limit the emperor's influence. Some urged subtlety, others urged action. A handful dreamed openly of replacing him. They were careful, of course. Rome's political world thrived on careful words and carefully placed loyalties. But the discussions existed, and their existence alone was dangerous. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens grew restless. Food shortages, rising prices, and the slow rebuilding of the burned districts led many to question the emperor's priorities. The Golden House became a symbol, not of artistic wonder, but of excess. Its beauty, once admired, now felt insulting. Nero tried to address the tension. He funded public games, offered festivals, gave gifts, lowered grain prices. He performed recitals to distract the people, believing music had the power to heal and inspire. And for a time, it worked. People cheered, crowds gathered, applause echoed. But applause is fleeting, and beneath it, the murmurs continued. One of the clearest signs of rising tension appeared in the Senate's reaction to the Golden House. When Nero declared that he planned to expand the palace grounds further, incorporating even more land near the heart of the city, the Senate responded with cold politeness. They approved his request publicly. To refuse would be dangerous, but the tone of their approval lacked warmth. It felt hollow, strained. Nero noticed. He began to withdraw more deeply into his sanctuary, finding comfort in the palace's endless beauty. The floating perfumes, the musical halls, the shimmering gardens, these were his refuge. He dreamed of creating more art, more rooms, more wonders. He imagined inviting philosophers, mathematicians, musicians from every province to share their ideas. A world where creativity and thought flourished, free from the confines of politics. But outside, the world was changing without him. Generals in distant provinces began to accumulate loyalty. Governors scrutinized Nero's decisions. Soldiers whispered about stability. Rome was drifting away from its emperor, and he seemed powerless to stop it, or perhaps unwilling to confront it. Tension grew like a shadow creeping across a sunlit floor, slowly, quietly, inevitably, and the palace itself, for all its splendor, seemed to reflect the shift. Guests no longer lingered in its hallways. Banquets grew less frequent. The laughter that once filled its chambers faded. The golden house, despite its brilliance, felt colder. It was no longer merely a symbol of Nero's imagination. It was becoming a symbol of his isolation. Section 6. The Empire Strains. Rebellion, Betrayal, and the Fracturing of Power. The golden house stood gleaming beneath the Roman sun, its marble surfaces glowing with soft warmth, its gardens rustling gently in the morning breeze. From afar it looked eternal, a palace designed to outlast time itself. Yet the empire surrounding it was beginning to tremble beneath growing uncertainty, while Nero drifted deeper into the worlds of poetry, performance, and architectural dreams. The political foundations of his rule weakened in slow, nearly invisible ways. The first cracks appeared far from Rome, in distant provinces where soldiers marched beneath unfamiliar skies. These soldiers, hardened by years of war and burdened by slow supply lines and poor pay, depended on strong imperial leadership. And Nero, absorbed almost entirely in artistic pursuits, had little interest in military matters. He saw war as a brutish distraction from creativity, something to be delegated, not endured. But soldiers felt differently. They valued emperors who marched alongside them, who understood the hardships of the frontier, who rewarded loyalty with respect. As months passed, frustration grew. A quiet but dangerous sentiment spread through the legions. Rome needed leadership, not performances. Meanwhile, governors and provincial commanders began noticing the same thing. The emperor seldom corresponded about matters of state. When letters arrived, they were brief, vague, or written with the tone of an artist rather than a ruler. Decisions that required firm judgment were postponed. Funds for military upkeep dwindled. Grain shipments became irregular. And the Golden House, with its endless luxuries and expanding gardens, loomed in their minds as the clearest example of Nero's shifting priorities. Some remained loyal, others grew uncertain. And a few began to consider alternatives. For an emperor, the most dangerous adversary is not an enemy army, but a man who believes he can do better. These men existed now in the empire's corners, ambitious, calculating, observant. They watched the unrest grow like dry brush beneath a hot sun. They studied the Senate's increasingly cold behavior. They took note of the people's resentment, and they waited. Back in Rome, Nero sensed only fragments of this tension. He heard rumors, but dismissed them as exaggerations. He believed music could soothe political discontent, and perhaps if he were anyone else, this might have held some truth. But the empire was vast, and the whispers were louder than any song he could sing. To calm the public, Nero organized a grand series of performances, festivals, and public feasts. He performed on stage for thousands, his voice drifting through the night air like a fragile thread. Audiences applauded, partly in admiration, partly in fear of being seen not clapping. For a moment, the atmosphere brightened. Lights shimmered. The city felt festive. But festivals do not feed families or rebuild burned districts. When the cheering stopped, the unrest returned stronger than before. Inside the Senate, discussions took on a sharper tone. A few senators whispered privately that Nero's reign had become a burden to the stability of the state. Others argued that the emperor, for all his eccentricity, was harmless and could be guided. But even among his defenders, concern grew. They knew how quickly Rome could shift from peace to chaos. They had lived through assassinations, civil wars, and political storms, and they could sense another storm forming. In one heated debate, conducted in hushed voices behind closed doors, a senator remarked, "Rome cannot be a stage forever. An emperor must lead, not perform." Even those who admired Nero's artistic passions knew the truth in those words. One of the clearest signs of the empire's strain came from the western provinces, where a respected governor named Galba had grown increasingly disillusioned with Nero's leadership. Galba was known for discipline, restraint, and command, an older man who viewed the world through the lens of duty rather than pleasure. When soldiers under his authority began complaining about pay, Galba sympathized. When they grumbled about Nero's indifference, he said nothing. Silence in Rome is rarely neutral. In the East, another figure held growing power. Vindex, a provincial governor frustrated by heavy taxes and slow administrative responses from Rome. He, unlike Galba, was bold and dangerous. He spoke openly about Nero's failings. He mocked the Golden House. He questioned whether the emperor cared at all for the people beyond his walls. His words spread like wind-driven sparks. Rebellious thoughts, once unthinkable, now felt possible. But even at this stage, Nero had opportunities to stabilize the empire. He could have addressed the military grievances, met with the Senate, paused construction of the Golden House, or simply shown the public that he understood their struggles. Yet Nero, drawn deeply into a world of artistic identity, saw politics as a disturbance rather than a priority. He believed creativity would elevate Rome. He believed beauty softened anger. But the empire did not want beauty. It wanted certainty. The strain increased when a series of small revolts flared in Gaul. Although quickly contained, they signaled something Rome had feared for decades. The provinces were beginning to lose confidence in the emperor's authority. Confidence, once lost, is extraordinarily difficult to regain. In response to reports of unrest, Nero reacted in ways that revealed his growing anxiety. He accused advisors of betrayal. He dismissed loyal administrators without cause. He moved abruptly between different political strategies. One day, he emphasized generosity. The next, he threatened punishments. His unpredictability alarmed everyone around him. Even those who still cared for him found themselves wondering whether the emperor they once knew was fading beneath layers of stress and delusion. Inside the Golden House, he retreated more often into the rooms that brought him comfort. The jewel-lit galleries, the musical chambers, the perfumed gardens under painted ceilings. But even these sanctuaries seemed to shift. The music felt softer, the gardens quieter, the lights dimmer, and no amount of beauty could silence the growing dread that was creeping through Rome like dusk settling over a valley. The most telling change came in Nero's own demeanor. His confidence wavered. His laughter became rare. His voice, usually warm and dramatic when he spoke of art, took on a subdued, almost distant tone. He still tried to create. He still planned new theatrical productions. But even these became less frequent, and his enthusiasm no longer sparked the same glow in his eyes. Rome could feel the change, and the empire, vast and fragile, strained under the growing weight of uncertainty. The question was no longer whether Nero could create beauty. It was whether beauty could save him. Section 7. The rebellions ignite. The empire turns against its emperor. The slow, silent tensions that had crept across the empire finally began to sharpen into something unmistakable. What had once been uneasy murmurs in provincial camps now erupted into open declarations. The empire, vast, complex, and worn by years of strain, stirred restlessly, as though waking from a long, uneasy dream. It began quietly, almost like the first tremor before an earthquake. A single proclamation appeared in Gaul, released by the governor Vindex. In calm but forceful language, it accused Nero of neglect, extravagance, and betrayal of Roman values. More importantly, it called for a new emperor, one who could restore dignity and stability to the empire. The document spread from village to village, then from garrison to garrison, carried by merchants, scribes, and soldiers, whose eyes widened as they read the words. Rome had not heard such open defiance in decades. When news reached Nero, he reacted with disbelief. He had always dismissed Vindex as impulsive, too quick to anger, too eager to challenge authority. To Nero, the rebellion seemed personal, an insult to his character, rather than a reflection of the empire's issues. His advisors tried to explain the seriousness of the situation, but he brushed them off with nervous irritation. "Gaul has rebelled before," he said. "It will kneel again." But this time, the rebellion was different. Vindex was not acting alone. Within weeks, he extended a hand to Galba, the stern and respected governor of Spain. Galba, though cautious, was deeply troubled by what he saw as Nero's increasing instability. He had tried for years to remain loyal, hoping the emperor would regain balance or accept counsel. But the empire was fraying, and Galba, seeing the weight of responsibility before him, made a decision that would shape history. He accepted the call. In a measured announcement, Galba declared himself not emperor, but the representative of the Senate and the Roman people. It was a phrase chosen with precision, a claim not to power, but to purpose. Its calm tone resonated across provinces, hungry for direction. Nero was stunned. For the first time, rebellion came not from a fringe province, but from a man admired by generals and governors alike. The threat was no longer distant. It was political, strategic, and dangerously legitimate. As the news spread through Rome, the city seemed to hold its breath. People whispered in crowded markets, at bathhouses, along narrow alleys. Some expressed hope, believing that change might bring relief from rising taxes and uncertainty. Others felt fear. They knew rebellion meant instability, and instability often brought destruction. The Senate watched silently, its members choosing their words with painful caution. Many of them had grown weary of Nero's erratic decisions, but supporting rebellion was a dangerous gamble. If Nero regained control, he would punish traitors mercilessly. If he fell, those who had stood with him would suffer under the new regime. Uncertainty became the air Rome breathed. In the Golden House, Nero wandered its bright halls restlessly. The glittering mosaics and vast reflective pools no longer soothed him. He spent long hours composing songs to calm his racing thoughts, but the melodies dissolved before they reached his lips. Even the gardens, once his sanctuary, felt strangely hollow. Flowers bloomed, fountains whispered, but none of it quieted the storm in his mind. At times, he tried to assert confidence. At other times, panic overwhelmed him. He accused trusted advisors of betrayal, then begged them not to leave him. He considered rallying the people with new performances, imagining applause drowning out the rumors. But even he sensed that the empire's frustration had grown too deep for music to mend. As Vindex's rebellion intensified, nearby legions faced a difficult choice: remain loyal to Nero or support the rebels. Many soldiers disliked the emperor, but loyalty was deeply ingrained in Roman military culture. Switching allegiance felt like treason, an unthinkable betrayal of Rome's sacred order. Yet the more they heard about Nero's neglect of military concerns, the more they wondered whether their loyalty was being returned. Clashes erupted between Vindex's forces and loyalist troops. Though Vindex fought fiercely, his rebellion faltered. The armies he hoped would join him did not rise in time, and the revolt suffered heavy losses. By the end of the conflict, Vindex had fallen, but his impact was irreversible. He had struck the match. The fire continued to spread. Galba, who had not yet raised arms, found himself in a delicate position. Many expected him to withdraw now that Vindex had been defeated. But Galba understood something vital. Nero's rule was too unstable to regain trust. If he stepped back, the empire would return to fear and uncertainty. Instead, he remained steady, gathering support quietly. One by one, provincial commanders declared for him, pledging their legions. Nero's isolation deepened. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal protectors, wavered. Traditionally loyal, they had become frustrated by delayed payments and disorganized leadership. When Galba offered a promise of financial reward, the Guard faced a choice between fading loyalty and immediate security. They chose security. The moment the Praetorian Guard declared for Galba, Nero's fate shifted dramatically. In Rome, the Senate convened in an atmosphere so tense that even the torches seemed to tremble. After years of restrained frustration, they finally took action. They declared Nero a public enemy. The proclamation echoed through marble halls that had once celebrated emperors with triumphs and festivals. Now, those same halls delivered a sentence. Nero learned the news late at night. Surrounded by only a handful of attendants, he stood in the vast interior of the Golden House, staring at the walls that once reflected music and laughter. Now they reflected only fear. The empire he once believed he could charm with art had turned its back on him. Rome no longer listened. The legions no longer saluted. The Senate no longer bowed. The Golden House, for all its beauty, could not protect him. All that remained now was to choose a path, and every path led into shadow. Section 8. The Last Days of an Emperor, Collapse of a Golden Dream. In the final days of Nero's life, Rome seemed strangely distant from him, as though the city he once ruled had drifted out of reach. The marketplaces still bustled, the bathhouses still filled with murmured gossip, the streets still echoed with the cries of vendors and the clang of metalworkers, yet all of it unfolded without him, as though he were already a ghost wandering through a world that had forgotten his name. For the first time in his rule, Nero felt something he had never imagined possible. He was alone. The Golden House, once radiant with light and music, became cavernous and still. The long hallways that had once carried the sound of instruments now carried only the soft, uneasy tapping of his footsteps. The enormous frescoes glimmered faintly in torchlight. Yet even their beauty seemed distant, unreachable. The statues, once proud and theatrical, stared down at him with blank marble expressions, offering neither comfort nor reassurance. Rome had turned its back on him, and the silence that replaced its applause felt unbearable. That final night, Nero met with a handful of attendants, the last few still loyal enough or fearful enough to remain at his side. They gathered beneath the towering arches of a private chamber, dimly lit by only a few flickering lamps. The air felt heavy, as though the room itself understood the weight of the moment. One attendant read aloud the Senate's decree. Nero had been declared a public enemy. The words settled like a stone in his chest. For an emperor, such a declaration was more than a political statement. It was a sentence. It meant the state had abandoned him, rejected him, and condemned him to die. No Roman emperor had ever fallen so abruptly, so completely. Nero listened with trembling hands, unable to fully process how quickly everything had unraveled. Not long ago, He had believed the people adored him. He had performed for them, opened his palace to them, even removed taxes to win their affection. But in the end, it had not been enough. Or perhaps it had always been the wrong approach. Now, those same crowds celebrated the news of his downfall, chanting in the streets, imagining a future free of uncertainty and extravagance. Nero turned away from the lamplight, trying to gather his thoughts. 1,000 questions pressed on him. Should he flee? Should he disguise himself? Should he beg for mercy? Should he attempt one last performance to win back their hearts? But none of the possibilities felt real. Every idea dissolved into hopelessness. Eventually, fear overtook him. He asked his attendants for suggestions, but they spoke in soft, "Simas," hesitant tones. Some urged him to hide outside the city until the situation clarified. Others hinted he should accept his fate with dignity, though they did not dare say the word death. When Nero asked for a horse to be prepared, his attendants hesitated, a dangerous sign. Their reluctance revealed the truth. Even they no longer believed escape would change anything. Still, Nero insisted. As dawn neared, he disguised himself in simple clothing and slipped out of the golden house through a side exit. Only 3 companions followed: Phaon, Epaphroditus, and 2 freedmen whose devotion had survived even these final days. Outside, the city felt shockingly quiet. It was as though Rome was holding its breath, waiting for history to take its next step. They moved along back streets, avoiding the main roads where Nero's enemies might be searching. The emperor wrapped his cloak tightly around him, hiding his face. Every sound made him flinch. Every distant shout reminded him of the danger that surrounded him. Eventually, they reached a small villa on the outskirts of the city, the home of Phaon. It was unremarkable, almost humble, with a cluster of olive trees swaying quietly near the entrance. The stillness felt surreal compared to the vast, opulent spaces Nero had known all his life. Inside, the group gathered in a dim storage room. Nero sank onto a worn couch, exhausted. The weight of reality pressed down on him. The Praetorian Guard was hunting him. He clutched at his throat, whispering, "What an artist dies in me." His attendants watched in silence, unsure how to comfort a man who had fallen so far, so fast. He asked them to dig a grave for him, trembling at the thought of what might happen if the soldiers found him alive. The men hesitated, not out of disrespect, but out of sorrow. They had served him for years. They had watched him rise, flourish, and unravel. When they returned with tools, Nero froze at the sound of branches cracking outside. The search party was approaching. There was no time left. His attendants urged him to take control of his fate before the soldiers could seize him. If captured, he would be humiliated, tortured, perhaps executed publicly. Nero took the dagger into his hands. His resolve wavered. His fear shook him. He looked to his attendants for courage. One told him softly that this was the only way to preserve a shred of dignity. Another turned away, unable to watch. In one trembling motion, Nero pressed the blade against himself, but lacked the strength to push further. In the end, it was Epaphroditus who helped guide the blade, fulfilling the emperor's final request. The moment was quiet. No triumphal shouts, no roaring crowds, no music. Just the soft, uneven breaths of a fallen emperor. When the soldiers finally arrived, they found him already gone. The dagger lying beside him, the room still heavy with the last echoes of his fear and desperation. The men exchanged glances, not of pity, but of solemn understanding. A chapter of Rome's history had closed not with glory or grandeur, but with a whisper in a shadowed room. Though his reign would be debated for centuries, his final days revealed a truth far deeper than politics. Even the most powerful man in the empire could not escape the weight of his own humanity. Section 9. Rome after Nero, a city in the aftermath. When news of Nero's death finally reached Rome, it spread through the city not as a single announcement, but like a slow, unfolding wave. People first heard it in whispers, merchants murmuring behind stalls, slaves exchanging quick glances, soldiers pausing mid-stride. By midday, the whispers had grown into clear, confident statements. The emperor was dead. Nero was gone. The reaction was unlike anything Rome had experienced before. Some citizens rejoiced openly, believing they had been freed from the whims of an unpredictable ruler. Others felt unsettled, frightened even, sensing that something irreversible had happened. Many simply didn't know what to make of it. For 14 years, Nero's influence had shaped every part of their lives, from the entertainment on the streets to the taxes they paid, to the endless rumors that colored public gossip. Now, suddenly, an emperor who once seemed unshakable had disappeared like a fading shadow. Rome breathed in this new reality with uncertainty. The Golden House, once the dazzling symbol of Nero's ambition, became one of the first places to reflect the city's shifting mood. Its entrance remained guarded, but the usual activity inside, mosaics being installed, fountains repaired, gardens tended, had come to a halt. Workers wandered through the wide hallways in a daze, unsure whether the project would continue or be abandoned. The palace's artificial lake, once shimmering with reflections of the sky, seemed strangely still. Without Nero's presence, the Golden House felt less like a palace and more like a question. What would Rome do with this enormous monument to a dead emperor? Nearby, senators met in hurried gatherings. They spoke cautiously, aware that every decision they made would shape how history remembered these days. Some were eager to erase Nero completely, fearing that leaving any trace of his legacy would carry political risk. Others argued for restraint, uneasy about the idea of dismantling such an impressive architectural achievement. Even those who despised Nero felt a sense of awe when standing inside his dreamlike estate. Yet one idea rose above all others: to return the land to the people. Within weeks, work began to strip away parts of the palace. Walls were torn down, precious materials were hauled off for repurposing, and the enormous estate was slowly transformed into a space for public use. Where Nero had enjoyed vast private gardens, Rome would eventually build the Colosseum, a symbol of unity, spectacle, and communal identity. It was as though the city wished to rewrite the landscape, replacing one man's excess with the gathering place of thousands. Even so, the Golden House did not vanish overnight. Its foundations were too deep, its tunnels too sprawling, its architecture too unusual to simply disappear. Over the centuries, parts of it would remain buried beneath the city, forgotten until archaeologists unearthed them long after Rome's empire had crumbled. But in those early months after Nero's death, the transformation felt almost ceremonial. Rome was attempting to heal itself. Markets buzzed with speculation. Who would become the next emperor? Would taxes change again? Would the Praetorian Guard stay loyal to the Senate? Conversations flowed like restless currents through the streets. People watched the horizon anxiously, aware that a major shift was approaching. Galba, the man the Senate had chosen to succeed Nero, began his journey toward Rome. Messengers announced his progress town by town. Some citizens admired his reputation for discipline and honesty, believing he could restore stability. Others felt uneasy, wary of a new leader whose authority leaned heavily on military support. After Nero's unpredictable style of rule, Rome felt strangely vulnerable, unsure if the next emperor would bring balance or further chaos. While the political world reorganized itself, everyday life continued with a strange mixture of normalcy and tension. Bakers still kneaded dough at sunrise. Fishermen still hauled their catches to the marketplaces. Children still played in courtyards, splashing water from fountains and chasing one another between pillars. Yet beneath this ordinary rhythm, a quiet awareness lingered. Rome had stepped into unfamiliar territory. Temples also played a role in this period of transition. Priests offered sacrifices, praying for the city's future. Citizens lined up to leave offerings, small clay figures, coins, garlands of flowers, hoping to appease the gods who had witnessed the turmoil of Nero's final years. Superstitions thrived. Some believed earthquakes or sudden storms were signs of the gods expressing their judgment on the emperor's fall. Others felt that Rome's divine protectors were guiding the city toward a more stable era. Among the crowds, people told stories, exaggerated, embellished, or entirely invented, about Nero's last days. Some described him fleeing through the night, disguised as a slave. Others claimed he still lived, hiding somewhere in the empire, waiting to reclaim the throne. These rumors grew so persistent that for decades afterward, several impostors emerged, claiming to be the true Nero returned from hiding. The idea of him lingering beyond death hinted at the deep psychological mark he had left on Rome. Artists, meanwhile, felt a strange sense of release. Under Nero, creativity had flourished but under a shadow. The emperor's own theatrical passions often overshadowed genuine artistic work. After his fall, poets felt freer to write honestly again. Some even composed quiet verses reflecting on the loneliness of power, subtly referencing Nero's decline without naming him. These poems circulated discreetly, murmuring through the intellectual networks of the city. Historians also began their careful work. They gathered testimonies, recorded events, and argued with one another over details. Their writings would shape Nero's reputation for centuries. Some depicted him as monstrous, a tyrant who indulged in excess while Rome suffered. Others, more sympathetic, suggested he was a complex figure, talented, insecure, influenced by those around him, and overwhelmed by a role for which he was unprepared. Rarely does history allow for a simple portrait, and Nero was no exception. Over time, Rome settled into a new rhythm. The shock faded. The politics shifted yet again. Emperors rose and fell in quicker succession. The city continued to grow, rebuild, and redefine itself. And slowly, the memory of Nero transformed, from a living presence to a historical figure, from an emperor to a cautionary tale. Yet his golden house remained the lingering echo of his ambition. Its corridors, buried beneath layers of soil and stone, kept their secrets for centuries. And whenever archaeologists rediscovered one of its painted chambers, they found a reminder not of destruction, but of creativity, a glimpse into the mind of a man who wanted to reshape Rome into a world of dreams, yet was ultimately undone by the weight of reality. Rome after Nero was a city in transition, caught between old shadows and new possibilities. And though much changed in the years following his fall, the memory of that strange, golden age never fully disappeared. It remained suspended just beneath the surface, quiet, fragile, and eternally compelling. Section 10. The Legacy of Nero's Golden House. The Domus Aurea, Nero's Golden House, did not disappear with his death. In fact, its afterlife became one of the most fascinating, layered stories in all of Roman history. It lived many lives, as a palace, a quarry, a foundation, a myth, an inspiration, a cave, a forgotten ruin, and eventually a rediscovered treasure that reshaped the world of art. Its legacy stretched far beyond Nero himself, touching centuries that would unfold long after the emperor had vanished. When the first builders arrived to dismantle the palace shortly after Nero's fall, they encountered a structure unlike anything Rome had seen before. Its vast halls, shimmering with frescoes and mosaics, seemed to belong more to fantasy than reality. Some workers described the sensation of stepping into the palace as walking into a dream that had solidified into stone. Even the simplest walls glowed with soft colors, and the ceilings offered scenes of delicate vines, mythical creatures, and floating figures. But the task was clear. Rome wanted to reclaim the land, and so the destruction began. Yet destruction is not quite the right word. In many places, the structure was not torn down, but filled in. Rather than demolish the enormous supporting halls, engineers chose to bury them under tons of earth and build new monuments on top. In some areas, these buried chambers remained sealed, protected from sunlight, footsteps, storms, and time itself. This accidental preservation would prove extraordinary. Above the palace's artificial lake, the Flavian emperors built the Colosseum, one of the most iconic buildings in all of human history. It is a striking thought. The world's most famous amphitheater stands on the drained basin of Nero's private pond. On the slopes where his gardens sprawled, new bathhouses rose. Where his pavilions once glimmered, later emperors constructed temples and public spaces. The Golden House became the quiet foundation for Rome's future, hidden yet supporting everything that came after. Still, even as Rome grew over it, the palace's reputation lingered. Stories circulated, some true, some exaggerated, about the incredible treasures that had once adorned its rooms. People whispered about rooms plated in gold, ceilings that sprinkled perfume, fountains that played music, and feasts so extravagant that even the most seasoned aristocrats felt overwhelmed. The truth was already blending with imagination. As centuries passed, the Domus Aurea slipped deeper into the earth. The entranceways collapsed. Vines and soil covered the openings. Eventually, even the memory of its location faded. The Golden House became a legend spoken of by historians, but unseen by any living eye. Then, in the late 15th century, long after the Roman Empire had fallen, something remarkable happened. A young Roman accidentally fell through a hole in the hillside. When he landed, he found himself in a vast, dim chamber, painted from floor to ceiling, with colors that had somehow survived the ages. The figures on the walls seemed to float in the flickering lamplight. The air was cool, untouched for 1,000 years. He had stumbled into one of Nero's buried rooms. Word spread quickly. Renaissance artists began lowering themselves into the grots, or caves, with ropes and lanterns. Among them were some of the greatest painters in history: Raphael, Ghirlandaio, Giulio Romano. They crawled through narrow passages, marveling at the ancient frescoes. The style they saw, delicate, whimsical, filled with twisting foliage, masks, and fantastical creatures, deeply influenced their own work. From these rediscovered rooms came the name grotesque art, derived from the word grotto. It was Nero's forgotten palace that gifted the world this entire artistic style. The Golden House had become a teacher from beyond time. Artists sketched its murals obsessively. They adapted the motifs into palaces, chapels, and villas across Europe. The Vatican walls still carry echoes of these designs. Even centuries later, the twisting, playful decorations found in Rococo art can trace ancestral roots back to the hidden chambers beneath Rome. Nero's extravagant vision, once condemned as decadent, had transformed into a source of beauty. But the rediscovery came with challenges. The air inside the sealed rooms was stable, untouched for ages. Once opened, humidity, breath, and torchlight threatened the frescoes. Some rooms began to deteriorate rapidly. Renaissance artists, eager to touch the ancient walls, left behind their own graffiti, signatures of admiration carved directly into the plaster. Ironically, the hands that loved the palace most also harmed it. Modern archaeologists inherited these delicate conditions. They worked to stabilize the chambers, creating tunnels, supports, and protective barriers. The palace became a fragile archaeological site, one that needed constant care. At times, heavy rainfall above caused collapses. Other times, fungal growth threatened the walls. Preservation became a careful dance between science and patience. Yet despite these difficulties, the Domus Aurea continued whispering its story to the world. Researchers discovered that Nero's architects had created previously unknown innovations. Some rooms used special light shafts to illuminate frescoes. Others used optical illusions to make the ceiling appear higher or the walls farther away. They found remnants of rotating platforms, ingenious heating systems, and even rare pigments made from volcanic minerals. The palace had been not only a vision of luxury, but also a triumph of engineering. Its influence extended beyond art. Architects studied its concrete techniques to understand how such vast spaces had been constructed. Historians examined its murals to learn about Roman aesthetics. Psychologists explored Nero's life to better understand the human mind under extreme power. The Golden House became a deep well of knowledge, connecting the ancient world with the modern one. But perhaps the most profound legacy of the Domus Aurea is the emotional reaction it evokes. Visitors describe a strange stillness inside the chambers. The air feels cooler, almost hushed, as if the rooms themselves are holding their breath. The frescoes, their colors softened by time, seem to float gently on the walls. There is a sense of entering a preserved dream, one that once belonged to a man whose ambitions stretched far beyond what reality could support. Standing inside, one feels the paradox of Nero's legacy: beauty born from turmoil, creativity overshadowed by chaos, a vision both admirable and tragic. The Golden House teaches a quiet lesson, that even the most controversial figures leave behind pieces of themselves that future generations can transform into something new. From Nero's private palace came public art, new techniques, new inspirations, and centuries of fascination. The palace outlived its creator. It outlived the empire, and in its lingering glow, buried beneath Rome, it continues to remind us that history is never static. It changes with each rediscovery, each reinterpretation, each new pair of eyes that steps into the shadows and sees something ancient light up again. Section 11. Myths, Legends, and the Ghost of Nero. Even long after Nero's death, and centuries after the Golden House was buried and partially forgotten, the emperor's image refused to fade from memory. For Romans of the subsequent generations, Nero became a figure both feared and mythologized, a character whose shadow lingered over the city he once ruled. His palace, with its impossible luxury and buried secrets, fueled countless stories, each more fantastical than the last, transforming history into legend and legend into myth. The whispers began almost immediately after his death. Accounts described Nero's spirit wandering the streets of Rome, as though he could not accept the fall from power that had come so abruptly. Some claimed that on certain nights, particularly during storms, the ghostly figure could be glimpsed through the fog, pacing the ruined gardens and halls of the Golden House. Romans told tales of hearing faint, eerie music emanating from underground chambers, music reminiscent of the feasts and banquets Nero had once hosted. In these stories, the palace itself became alive, almost sentient, mourning or celebrating its creator, depending on the observer's perspective. Over the centuries, Nero's legend intertwined with superstition. Medieval chroniclers recast him as a demonic figure, the ultimate symbol of tyranny and excess. They embellished stories of his cruelty, his obsessive vanity, and the horrific consequences of his whims, often linking them to natural disasters like earthquakes and fires. In their writings, the Domus Aurea transformed into a haunted labyrinth, a place where shadows danced with gold and lost spirits lingered in the frescoed halls. Yet the legend of Nero's ghost was not purely malevolent. Some narratives spoke of him as a restless visionary, an emperor whose ambitions were too vast for the mundane constraints of life. In these versions, wandering the city was not a punishment, but a form of longing, a yearning to witness the beauty he had once imagined and to see Rome prosper as he had hoped. Travelers and dreamers told of feeling a strange presence in dark, quiet corners of the city, a whisper of an unfulfilled dream, a lingering sense of curiosity and wonder. Artists of the Renaissance, who rediscovered parts of the Golden House, could hardly separate legend from reality. Entering the grot with lanterns in hand, they felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon them. Some claimed to have seen shapes in the flickering light, elongated shadows that seemed almost human, twisting and bowing along the walls of the palace. Could these be the ghosts of Nero's imagination, or merely the mind's response to the surreal environment? The stories persisted, leaving a palpable tension between the empirical and the mystical. Literature contributed further to Nero's spectral reputation. Poets and historians wove tales of a cursed emperor, one whose life and death blurred the lines between myth and history. Writers like Suetonius and Tacitus had documented the reality of Nero's reign, noting his ambition, his artistic inclinations, and his notorious misdeeds. Later storytellers expanded on these accounts, imagining nocturnal processions through invisible halls, conversations with spirits of past citizens, and mysterious messages left in hidden frescoes. Some claimed that decoding these hidden murals could reveal secrets of the Roman Empire itself, as if Nero had left instructions for those who dared to explore the palace after his demise. The Domus Aurea itself became a character in these legends. Its partially buried state gave it a liminal, almost magical quality. Hidden corridors and underground rooms suggested secret knowledge, places where the emperor's presence could still be felt. Passages filled with frescoes of mythological creatures, strange patterns, and grotesque designs were said to respond to human presence, creating optical illusions that seemed supernatural. Visitors reported feeling chills, hearing echoes where none should exist, and sensing that the walls themselves were watching. In this way, the palace acted as both stage and actor, amplifying Nero's ghostly persona through the architecture itself. Interestingly, these legends also reflect broader human fascination with power and its consequences. Nero's excesses, the grandeur of the Golden House, and the public's fear and admiration for the emperor created a narrative that was both cautionary and seductive. His ghost symbolizes the tension between ambition and morality, creativity and destruction, human longing and the inevitable passage of time. The stories of haunting are not just about fear. They are a meditation on memory, the persistence of influence, and the way individuals are remembered long after their lives end. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the myth of Nero's ghost had crossed borders. Travelers to Rome carried tales of spectral sightings and haunted ruins into France, England, and beyond. Artists and writers incorporated these ideas into paintings, plays, and literature. The Golden House inspired Gothic aesthetics, dark, labyrinthine corridors, dramatic contrasts of light and shadow, and the idea of spaces that hold both beauty and terror. Nero's legacy had moved beyond history and into collective imagination, demonstrating how physical spaces and human stories can merge into enduring cultural myths. Even modern archaeology has not diminished the sense of mystery surrounding Nero's palace. Visitors to the Domus Aurea today encounter dimly lit rooms, frescoes fading but still astonishing, and passages that twist unexpectedly. While researchers understand the engineering, the pigments, and the historical context, it is nearly impossible to remove the sense of awe and the lingering feeling that one is walking through a place shaped by myth as much as reality. The ghost of Nero, whether a literal spirit or a metaphorical presence, remains a compelling force, reminding us that history is a blend of facts, interpretations, and imagination. The endurance of Nero's legend teaches a quiet but profound lesson. Human creativity, even when accompanied by excess or cruelty, leaves traces that echo through time. Architecture, art, and myth all become intertwined, and the stories we tell about the past shape our understanding of reality. Nero's Golden Palace, once condemned and buried, emerged as a symbol of this interplay. Through layers of earth, centuries, and imagination, it continues to tell a story of ambition, beauty, folly, and the haunting persistence of memory. In the end, Nero's ghost, whether real or imagined, is a reminder that places hold the power of stories. The Domus Aurea, with its glowing frescoes and hidden halls, is not simply a ruin. It is a living archive of human aspiration, creativity, and the strange ways history preserves the extraordinary, the tragic, and the beautiful. Walking through its chambers, one can almost hear the distant music, see the flickering lights, and sense the presence of an emperor who, for better or worse, refused to vanish completely from the consciousness of the world. Section 12. The rediscovery and restoration of the Domus Aurea. Centuries after Nero's death, the Domus Aurea lay largely forgotten beneath layers of earth, rubble, and the constant march of Rome's urban life. As time passed, the once majestic palace transformed from a site of luxury into a near mythical ruin. By the Renaissance, the existence of Nero's golden halls was largely obscured by legend, but curiosity about the past remained alive in the hearts of scholars, artists, and architects. The rediscovery of the Domus Aurea in the late 15th century marked a turning point, bridging ancient Roman splendor with the creative fervor of Renaissance Europe. The story of its rediscovery is almost as mysterious as the palace itself. In 1480, a young Roman architect named Giovanni Gigli stumbled upon an entrance while digging a vineyard on the Palatine Hill. What he found was a hidden corridor that led into vast subterranean chambers, illuminated only by shafts of daylight filtering through cracks in the ceiling. The frescoed walls, with their intricate patterns and figures, that seemed to float in midair astonished him. Gigli was not alone in his fascination. Word quickly spread among scholars and artists who were eager to explore what had been concealed beneath the city for nearly 15 centuries. The initial encounters with the Domus Aurea were a mix of awe and apprehension. Visitors reported eerie sensations, as though the palace itself were alive. The frescoes, with their fantastical figures, grotesques, and delicate depictions of mythological scenes, seemed to move in the flickering torchlight. Some claimed to hear echoes of ancient music, or the soft footsteps of unseen figures. These subterranean rooms, almost untouched by modern life, preserved a sense of magic and grandeur that had long been forgotten. It was a world apart from the bustling streets above, a hidden realm of art and ambition that few could have imagined existed beneath the modern city. Artists of the Renaissance were particularly captivated by the Domus Aurea. Figures like Raphael, Michelangelo, and Pinturicchio descended into its grottos, studying the murals, frescoes, and stuccos with a meticulous eye. The palace's imaginative decoration influenced a new wave of artistic creativity. The grotesques, whimsical creatures, and floating architectural motifs became central to the grotesque style in Renaissance art, a direct homage to Nero's aesthetic vision. Painters and architects marveled at the technical mastery, the combination of illusion and reality, and the audacity of Nero's design. The palace became both inspiration and playground for the minds of a new era, connecting past and present in ways that transcended centuries. Restoration efforts began cautiously. The palace had been partially buried, its frescoes delicate and vulnerable, and the structural integrity of the halls was uncertain. Early explorers had to navigate fallen ceilings, collapsed staircases, and hidden chambers filled with debris. They moved with care, guided by both admiration and fear, aware that they were walking through a site where imperial ambition and historical tragedy converged. The restoration process, slow and painstaking, sought to preserve not only the physical structures, but also the feeling of wonder that pervaded the space. Conservators cleaned frescoes, stabilized walls, and gradually opened additional rooms for study. One of the most significant challenges of restoration was dealing with the interplay of ancient materials and centuries of decay. The pigments used in Nero's time had faded, while moisture and plant growth threatened the fresco's survival. Conservators developed innovative techniques to stabilize and preserve the murals, using a combination of modern science and traditional craftsmanship. Their goal was not only to save the art, but to maintain the unique atmosphere of the Domus Aurea, a place where light and shadow, form and illusion, history and myth intersected. Even today, visitors walking through the palace's corridors are struck by the delicate balance between preservation and the uncanny vitality of the space. Archaeological study expanded understanding of Nero's ambitions. The palace was more than a lavish home. It was a manifestation of the emperor's desire to impress, inspire, and sometimes intimidate. The large octagonal hall, thought to be a place for banquets or ceremonial events, revealed advanced Roman engineering. A rotating ceiling that may have mimicked the movement of the heavens, powered by water and gears. The long, frescoed corridors and ornate rooms were designed not merely for comfort, but for theatrical effect, creating a sense of drama and wonder for those who traversed them. The rediscovery of these spaces allowed historians to grasp the scale of Nero's vision and the lengths to which he went to assert his cultural and political authority. The influence of the Domus Aurea extended beyond art and architecture. It affected philosophy, literature, and even the cultural imagination. Writers and thinkers drew on the palace as a symbol of ambition, hubris, and the tension between beauty and excess. The rediscovery reminded the world that history is often buried beneath layers of time, waiting for someone to uncover its hidden lessons. Through the work of restorers and archaeologists, Nero's vision, both brilliant and flawed, could be experienced anew, bridging a gap of more than a millennium. Modern access to the Domus Aurea is carefully controlled. Tours descend into the subterranean chambers with low lighting and guided explanations, preserving the fragile frescoes while allowing visitors to experience the grandeur of Nero's vision. The rooms remain eerily quiet, with the faint smell of ancient stone and paint still lingering. Some say that in these halls, one can almost hear the distant echoes of the emperor himself, a ghostly presence that is less frightening than awe-inspiring. In this way, the palace continues to serve as a bridge between past and present, between human creativity and the passage of time. The story of the Domus Aurea's rediscovery is a testament to the enduring power of human curiosity. From the first accidental entrance to the painstaking restoration efforts of modern archaeologists, the palace's revival demonstrates how history and imagination intertwine. It reminds us that even the most extraordinary ambitions, no matter how long forgotten, leave traces that can inspire, challenge, and captivate future generations. Nero's golden halls, once hidden beneath centuries of soil, now stand as a symbol of the persistence of art, ambition, and memory. They offer a rare glimpse into the mind of an emperor who, in life and death, continues to fascinate and haunt us. Section 13. Nero's Legacy in Art, Literature, and Culture. The story of Nero's Domus Aurea does not end with the rediscovery of the palace. Rather, it continues to resonate through centuries of art, literature, and culture, leaving a legacy that is as complex as the emperor himself. Nero's life, infamous for its extremes of luxury, cruelty, and theatricality, inspired countless works that sought to understand the man behind the myth. From Renaissance painters wandering through the frescoed halls to contemporary historians dissecting Roman politics, Nero's influence persists in ways both subtle and dramatic, demonstrating the enduring fascination with power, creativity, and excess. Artists in particular found a wealth of inspiration in Nero's architectural and aesthetic innovations. The grotesque murals of the Domus Aurea, with their intricate forms and floating motifs, sparked a creative renaissance of their own. During the 15th and 16th centuries, artists such as Raphael and Pinturicchio absorbed these designs, translating them into frescoes and drawings that adorned churches, palaces, and villas throughout Italy. The whimsical imagery of animals, mythological creatures, and impossible architectural illusions directly informed the grotesque style in Renaissance art, a form that celebrated imagination over realism. In this way, Nero's taste for spectacle and novelty, once criticized as decadent, became a source of admiration and emulation, showing how art can transcend the morality of its patron. Literature, too, has been deeply influenced by Nero's story. Roman historians like Suetonius and Tacitus documented his reign with both fascination and moral judgment, portraying him as a ruler whose ambition and eccentricity verged on the supernatural. These accounts, often filled with vivid anecdotes of Nero's performances, extravagances, and tyrannies, shaped the European imagination for centuries. During the Enlightenment, writers used Nero as a symbol of absolute power corrupted by vanity, while Romantic authors later explored the tragic and almost mythic dimensions of his personality. He became more than a historical figure. He transformed into a literary archetype of excess, ambition, and the human capacity for both creation and destruction. The Domus Aurea itself became an object of literary and scholarly reflection. Diaries and travelogues from the 16th to 18th centuries recount journeys into the palace's subterranean chambers, describing the sensory experience of walking among frescoes that seemed suspended in time. Writers were captivated by the interplay of light and shadow, the sudden glimpses of delicate figures on crumbling walls, and the eerie sensation that the palace was alive with history. In these accounts, Nero's halls were a reminder that human ingenuity can endure even beyond the moral judgment of history, and that the past is never truly lost, only waiting for someone to rediscover it. Cultural historians also note that Nero's influence extended into modern popular imagination. The emperor appears in films, television series, and novels, often depicted as a flamboyant and enigmatic figure. His life and the legend of the Domus Aurea serve as a backdrop for exploring themes of power, artistry, and the consequences of excess. From grand cinematic recreations of Rome to scholarly biographies, Nero's story continues to provoke fascination, offering insight into the ways human ambition can create both beauty and destruction. Even today, the palace stands as a symbol of a civilization's capacity for architectural innovation and aesthetic daring, reminding viewers that history is not only about events, but also about imagination and perception. Music and theater have also found inspiration in Nero's story. Composers and dramatists have portrayed him as a character embodying the tension between creation and tyranny, exploring the psychological and cultural dimensions of his reign. The Domus Aurea, with its sense of hidden wonder and theatrical design, has been referenced in operas and stage productions, evoking the feeling of mystery and spectacle. By examining how Nero's tastes and ambitions influenced the arts across centuries, we gain a fuller understanding of his impact on culture and the enduring fascination with the interplay between power and creativity. The historical and archaeological significance of Nero's legacy is inseparable from the ethical questions it raises. The Domus Aurea represents the height of human ingenuity, yet it was built at tremendous social cost, appropriating vast resources and displacing citizens. This duality, beauty born from excess, innovation shadowed by exploitation, continues to provoke debate among historians Ethicists and artists. Visitors to the palace often reflect on this paradox. How can something so aesthetically breathtaking emerge from acts that by modern standards might be considered morally reprehensible? It is this tension that makes Nero's legacy so compelling, reminding us that history is rarely simple and that human creativity is intertwined with ambition, power, and consequence. The preservation and study of the Domus Aurea also illustrate the ongoing relationship between history and modern technology. Contemporary archaeologists use advanced imaging techniques, laser scanning, and environmental controls to conserve the delicate frescoes and structural elements of the palace. These modern tools allow a new generation of scholars and visitors to experience the grandeur of Nero's vision, connecting with a past that had once been hidden beneath centuries of rubble. By merging ancient artistry with modern science, the Domus Aurea serves as a bridge across time, demonstrating how human curiosity and ingenuity continue to illuminate even the most distant epochs. In essence, Nero's legacy is a study in contrasts, a story of brilliance and moral ambiguity, of beauty and destruction, of human creativity intertwined with the extremes of power. The rediscovery and preservation of the Domus Aurea allow us not only to witness the emperor's vision, but also to reflect on the enduring human fascination with grandeur, spectacle, and the tension between excess and artistry. From Renaissance painters to modern historians, Nero's influence has shaped the way we interpret art, power, and culture, reminding us that history is not merely a record of events, but a source of inspiration, reflection, and imagination. Outro: Nero's story, preserved in stone, fresco, and memory, reminds us that history is alive, constantly revealing new insights and inspiring future generations. His golden palace, once a symbol of imperial excess, now stands as a testament to human creativity, ambition, and the enduring power of art to transcend time. Through its rediscovery, we see that even the most extravagant ambitions can leave a legacy that continues to fascinate, educate, and inspire, inviting us to reflect on the delicate balance between power, morality, and imagination.